Welcome to our Shir, Parshas Savo, Tafshin Pei, and we'll have to get used to soon saying Tafshin Pei Aleph as we come to the end of our year. And of course, we know that the Klal is in this week's Sedra because Techel Shanu Kiloseh, Techel Shanu Birchai Seha. So I'd like to just bring one machshava on the parsha that was really two kashas that were troubling me. If we take a look at the beginning of our Sedra, we talk about V'hayik Savo al Oretz, Asher Hashem Elokecha Noisen Lecha Nachla V'yishta V'shavta Ba. You're to come into Eretz Yisrael. The big moment has arrived. We're here. We've made it. And then V'lekachtem in Reishis Kol Pri Adam. You're going to take from the fruit of the land. Rashi gives the example of taking a te'ena, taking a fig, and when it starts to grow, when the first one comes out, you put something on it in order to remember it. Asher Tavi Me Artzecha Asher Hashem Lekecha Nice and Love Samta Batena Velachta El Makam, and you'll take it to the place with the kayin, and we know the whole ceremony. You'll put it. The kayin takes the tena biodecha, he puts it into the basket, and you make a whole vidui. And you say something we're all familiar from our Haggadah. These are the psukim it's built on, and you tell the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. V'yanisa v'armarta lifnei Hashem Elokecha Rami Ovid Avi v'yered Mitzrayma v'yager sham b'mseimiyad v'yisham l'goy gadol, etc., etc., etc. And we're going to go and we tell the whole story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. So the question is, you think about it, fruit, Yetzias Mitzrayim, what's the connection between Bikurim, between the first fruits, and why here is the time when we mention Yetzias Mitzrayim? We don't just mention Yetzias Mitzrayim. It's not even in Agav, in Shema, we mention Yetzias Mitzrayim, and other places mention Yetzias Mitzrayim, in Kiddush. And we used to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim, but here, the ganze Ganzkeit, the ganze from beginning to all the way through, from Arami Ovid Avi. Why do we do that? What's the connection that Bikurim? And the second question that was troubling me, as we know Parshas Savo, as we mentioned at the beginning, is the klala. Is the klalas nebuch that we have, and we want to get rid of them before the end. Where does Bikurim to the teichacha? Where does Bikurim come to the teichacha? What do the two have in connection with each other? So I'd like to share with you two stories, personal stories that I have experienced in my life of incredible hashgacha pratis. One of them I had the schus of telling in connection with the Aguda charity drive that we just concluded. And the other one is a story that also, during my lifetime, I saw unbelievable hashgacha pratis. So the first story happened, and this is a little bit how I got my job in the Aguda. And the story happened all the way back in Tafshin Lamed Tes, 1979. It was before Pesach. And I was going to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where my father served as a Rav there for 40 years, to visit for Pesach. We went for the Sidorim for Pesach. And I went, at that time I had my wife and a little 2-year-old son. And we're on the plane. And lo and behold, something very unusual. There's a middle-aged yid sitting a few rows in front of us, from man. Yarmulke and everything. Very unusual in those days to find a frum person on the plane. So I went over he calls me over, he sees me, I see him, and he says, "Oh, younger man, come sit with me for a few minutes, keep me company." So I asked permission of my wife and went over there. And he says to me, he says, "What are you doing on the plane?" So I said, "Well, I'm from Milwaukee, I live there, my father's a Rav in the city, and I'm going to Milwaukee to visit over there. After Pesach, we're going for the storm." And I said, "What are you doing on the plane?" So he says, "There's a yid, Mr. Schwartz, from South America. And he's come to Milwaukee for a heart operation, at a certain hospital, St. Luke's, and he's in the hospital. And I'm going from New York to Mivaka Chayla. I'm going for 2 hours. I'm going to go right back to the airport and go home." I said, "Wow, it's interesting that of all places I should meet you for the 2 hours." I'm like, so he tells him, he starts getting the conversation. He says, "What are you planning on doing with yourself? What are you doing now?" I said, "I'm the Mir Yeshiva Koil. I'm looking to go out." He says, "What do you want to do?" I said, "It's Kiruv, something to do with the Rabbi, something to do with Askonis. I want to be in Klei Kodesh somewhere." So he tells me, he says, "You seem to be a fine young man." He says, "Call the Aguda, speak to my friend Shmuel Blum, and tell him Benny Fishoff sent you." Benny Fishoff was the chairman of the board of Agudas Yisrael at that time. He should have a full-shlem, should have a full-shlem. But he said, so I thinking to myself, and I followed him up, and I called Rabbi Bloom. And 5 interviews later, a few days later, I was in the office of Rabbi Moshe Sher, who offered me the job, told me I can become part of Jewish history, which Baruch Hashem, 6 Yom HaShas later, Kachava, and Baruch Hashem, I was able to get it. And I always thought the Hashgacha Pratis, it's a shidduch made in heaven, as a Hashgacha Pratis. I should be going on a plane, to Milwaukee, to visit my parents. And that was the last time I went. My father was nifter shortly after, and it was the last time we went there for a Pesach. And a Yid should be on a plane for 2 hours. And he should be visiting a Yid from South America, who's in for a heart operation. I mean, the Hashgacha Pratis was off the charts. And I saw there that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted me to be here. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu was Mesav Kol HaSvuvim. He made it happen. Story number 1. Story number 2 is we lived in Brooklyn for many years, and we wanted, Thomas Sibus, we wanted to move to Monsey. And we were short, we made a cheshbon financially, and we were short at that time, we're talking 25 years ago, $6,000 a year. We just couldn't stretch our budget in Chulu. 6,000 is what we needed. And we had to make a decision by January 31st at the end of the business day, or we would lose the house. We didn't know what to do. We were basically in use. We can't do it. So I got a call from a friend of mine at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He says, Rabbi Labish, you know something? So I just made a deal. I helped somebody make a deal. And because I made the deal, I got a commission. And I would like to take the commission. I never learned Daf Yomi, but I'd like to have the schus of Daf Yomi. So I would like to know if I give you $5,000 a year, which is my thing, that's how much is it. I give you that. Instead of I taking it, I'll give it to you, and you'll take it every year. You got it every year. And you'll learn Daf Yomi for me on my behalf. So I'm thinking to myself, this is incredible Hashgacha Pratis. I mean, wow. Out of the blue at $5,000. It's almost 6. I almost made it. And then he stops and he says something. He says, but you know, I don't have the $5,000. That's not really my money. I made a deal. So I get a brokerage, $5,000 a year. But I want something that should come from me. So he said, I'm going to add on $1,000 of my own money. So the total will be $6,000. Can you imagine? $6,000, exactly what I needed. 3 hours later, we made the house, we made the offer, and Baruch Hashem, we're living here for 25 years. So I learned a number of things from that story. I said, you know, we mamash had given up. And I said to myself, you know, it says in the pasuk, it says, Chuas Hashem Kerafayim. The salvation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is like in a blink of the eye. And you know why? And the pshat said because, and it says that it's darkest before it gets light. Because when do you daven the best? When you realize no longer in your hands. As long as you think a deal is in your hands, if I give off a little bit, I give up a little bit, you know, and you think it's in your hands, that's fine, okay, it's in your hands, I leave it in your hands. But when you turn to the Rebbeinu, I'm at wit's end. I don't know what to do anymore. Hashem, please help me. Hashem says, okay, I'm going to help you. And therefore, Chuas Hashem Kerafayim. It's mamash, it comes because Hashem's help can come in a blink. And that's why we say that the night is the darkest before the morning. Because when the darkest is when you daven the most, and when the morning comes, it's there for you. So these 2 stories, incredible Hashgacha Pratis. And I've had them, like, throughout my life, I've seen HaKadosh Baruch Hu guiding me. But Emerson, there's a little bit of a tayus here, a little bit of a mistake here. Because the emes is that when we put a seed into the ground and it comes up a beautiful lush fruit, that nace is just as big. Everything HaKadosh Baruch Hu does for us is a nace. Everything HaKadosh Baruch Hu does is an incredible siyata d'shmaya. Everything. And we sometimes confuse it because we think only when we have an amazing story, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu is megala to us, azah hashgacha pratis, that's when we say, oh, that's hashgacha pratis. But the fruit grows? Fruits grow. So I think what Parshas Ki Savo is all about is telling us, Rabbi say, you're going to go into Eretz Yisrael, and you're going to have fruit. And you're going to say, okay, I had fruit. No, as was. You put the seed in the ground and the fruit comes, Wait until you get a famine. Wait until you get the Dust Bowl days. Then you'll know that's not so pashut. But al pi derech hateva, right? When's the last time you went into a supermarket and there wasn't food? And that was the pachad by COVID, the pachad before Pesach. Was there's not going to be food after Pesach. So we don't. So very often we don't realize that Bikurim is as big a miracle as Yetzias Mitzrayim. And therefore the pasuk tells V'haya ki savo el haaretz, you're going to come into Eretz Yisrael, and you're going to have fruit, and you have produce, and you can take it for granted. No, Kodesh Baruch Hu says is making a big mistake. You're getting fruit is a nace. You're getting all the things. It's all nisim. It's all from Kodesh Baruch Hu. Some you see, some you don't see so fast. So Kodesh Baruch Hu says you're going to bring your first fruits. I want you to do a vidui meiser. I want you to say it over. I want you to listen. I want you to listen to yourself hard. I'm going to tell you the whole story of Yetzias Mitzrayim from beginning to end, from Arami Ovid Avi, right? Bizgal Yisrael. You're going to do the whole thing, right? Like Shabbos ago, you're going to do the whole thing because you're going to realize Bikurim, Yetzias Mitzrayim, out from the Rebbeinu Shalom. And then the Rebbeinu Shalom tells us, Kinderlach. With all of that, sometimes you'll say the Vidui Meiser, Medaven, but you won't be concentrating so well. So he says, I'm going to help you. There'll come a time when you really are ignoring all of these lessons, and you really don't see the Yad HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So I'm going to help you out. The Teichacha. Read the Teichacha. Read HaKadosh Baruch Hu and really Iberkernich, the Welt, and everything like that. Know that it's there. Read it. Think about it. And then you won't have to have it. Bezos Hashem. And that's what we went through, the Tekufas HaKovid, which unfortunately is a little bit coming back, and we have to be mispal. Guts the Rebbeinu Shalom is on nicht sick kimmen. But the Tekufas HaKovid helped us all feel. I cannot tell you how many people with a smile said, now they're going to see the Rebbeinu Shalom rules the Welt. Yet Zetman. All those people, they're going to see it now. They can't get away from it. They can all think Kaich v'yaitzim yadi. They can all think, we don't need a Kodesh Baruch. We have science. We have v'chreis. All of these things. We don't need any more of the Rebbeinu Shalom. You need the Rebbeinu Shalom. And that's what the COVID taught us. And that's why we do the Bikurim. That's why we do this long vidui. That's why we have the Teichacha, all to tell us of the Hashgacha Pratis of the Eibishter in the Welt. So we're coming up to Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, getting closer and closer and closer. As we spoke last week when we went through the Sedras and showed, starting from Veschanan after Tisha B'Av, we have the Parshas Veschanan. We're starting our Tfilas, our Tchina, and we're going through Eikev, we're going through Shoiftim, we're going through Kiseitze, Kisavai, Tzavim, Vayelech, Hazinu, and we end up with the Bracha. So the Eber Zaholfen, that we should prepare ourselves as best as we can for the Yom Narayim. We should utilize what's left of El. We're halfway through, Rabbi Yisai. Let's utilize what's left to the best so that we can bring ourselves and be ready for the Yemei Hadin and realize the Kayach of the Rebbeinu Shalom in everything that we do. Have a good Shabbos.